Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us all here today. I'm thrilled to be with my friend, among my friends, the Assembly Minority Leader Will Barkley, with whom I had the privilege of serving in the State Assembly, and of course my colleagues, former colleagues in the State Senate and State Assembly. I think I know most of you. I'm Mark Molinaro, Dutchess County Executive. Today we gather again together during a moment of great difficulty for New York and American families. The truth of the matter is, as we speak, the rate of inflation continues to rise, the cost of living continues to go up, and the answer from Washington and Albany Democrats continues to be to push solutions out further and further. To use an analogy, the house for so many people is on fire, and they need us to come and put the fire out. You will see in budget bills later today, you will hear from Washington and Albany that as we stand on the sidewalk and watch the house burn, Americans, American families, and New Yorkers are being asked to wait a few months for a response. In fact, the response from Washington and Albany Democrats seems to continue to be to fuel the fire. We are in the situation because certainly a global pandemic has resulted now in increased demand for supplies. There's no question. But at the same time, reckless spending out of Washington and Albany has fueled inflation to the point where it is now costing American families $296 a month more to live than it did only 2 years ago, only before the pandemic. And New Yorkers need us to act quickly. The response around here seems to be to spend more money, and make no mistake, government spending fuels inflation. In particular, Washington spending fuels inflation. There's only one level of government in this country that prints money, and it is Washington, D.C., and it continues to do so recklessly without concern for the impacts individual families, farmers, and small businesses are facing. The individuals here today join together to remind our colleagues that we need to act immediately to provide relief now. Now, there are ways to do that in a meaningful sense, and it starts with the elimination of taxation. New York State must immediately provide a tax holiday on fuel taxes, and by the way, I'd offer otherwise. But nevertheless, an immediate holiday on taxation to provide some relief. And I'm grateful to my colleagues, in particular Senators Akshar and Oberrocker, for their bill, and I know that there are others here who have presented legislation to provide that relief. Doing so will immediately offer at least the signal, and in many cases the reality, of relief at the pump. Secondly, America and New York ought to look at expanding its supply of oil. There is little question that policies out of Albany and Washington have restricted supply, and that's driving up cost. There are some, you may ask, who will say, yes, but that won't provide results immediately. However, the pricing of gasoline is based on projections and confidence. If America says we will no longer buy fuel from oil from tyrants and dictators, if we would stop negotiating with countries that are dead set on attacking us, and instead explore safely both in New York and across America the expansion of supply, we send a message to the world and to American consumers that we're interested in confronting this problem comprehensively. That includes restarting the Keystone Pipeline and, yes, safe extraction where it makes sense in the state of New York. Now, at the same time, there is little question that there are those who are going to take advantage of this moment. Yes, we acknowledge there ought to be, without question, very clear indication to providers, to businesses, and to larger oil companies. This is not a moment to take advantage of the American people or New Yorkers. And there ought to be a concerted effort to ensure that price gouging does not occur in the state of New York. Now, what I will also say as a local elected official, it's incumbent on us to also offer relief at the local level as well. And what that means in New York, in particular for some of us in the Mid-Hudson Valley, not only ought we cap and provide a sales tax holiday at the local level, we ought to immediately rescind, if not temporarily, the MTA gas tax, which no one seems to want to talk about in the majorities, but continues to steal thousands upon thousands of dollars from Mid-Hudson and Long Island drivers for the purposes of subsidizing the least affected, most bloated and broken public authority in the world, the MTA. All of this combined would provide immediate relief. Some we should acknowledge, some of it minor. but all of it the message that we take seriously the fact that the people we serve are overburdened by increased costs and the rising price not only of gas, but of everything else in their lives. Americans and New Yorkers expect us to react. The house is on fire, and our job is to put the fire out, not to ask people, as Antonio Delgado and Democrats in Washington and Albany have said consistently these last 2 weeks, not to tell Americans and New Yorkers that they ought to wait in line for a government subsidy. HEAP and social welfare programs are important. They're important. I grew up on food stamps. I can tell you, as the responsible level of government for managing those programs, we provide countless aid and so much assistance to families. But they are overburdened, they are inefficient, and they will force New Yorkers to wait and to live on subsidy, when instead of spending money, what Albany and Washington ought to do is drive down cost, drive down expenditure, and provide relief to American families and New York families. And so with that, I'll welcome my friend, Assembly Minority Leader Will Barkley. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Mike. Well, good morning, everyone. I want to thank Mark Molinaro for putting this event together. Obviously, as Mark mentioned, I had the pleasure of serving with Mark a few years ago when he was in the Assembly, and he's been a terrific county executive. I know he's going to be a great congressman, because there's not many people out there in New York that have put the time, effort, and energy to make New Yorkers have a better place to live than Mark Molinaro. So thank you very much, Mark, for setting this up. We're here to talk about inflation and gas prices. As Mark said, the house is on fire. New Yorkers need help now. They don't need it in a year. They don't need it in a month. They don't need it in weeks. They need relief right now. And we got in this situation. This didn't happen overnight, particularly with the energy costs and gas prices. We've seen some of the Democratic policies, whether on the state level or nationally. They banned fracking in New York State. They either have not allowed new pipelines, or they've shut down old pipelines to deliver crucial natural gas. And they've shut down any reliable energy source out there. They've really taken away this country's energy independence. And when everybody knows, when you lower production or keep production level, and when demand goes up, you're going to have price increases. And that's what we're suffering through now, particularly because of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So we recognize this in the Assembly Republican Conference. In fact, back in October, we put forth a bill to kind of combat inflation in New York State, where we propose, and I think the Senate has a similar bill, where we want to take the sales tax off of certainly gas, but other products like home products and certain food products. And what have the Dems done? What have they done so far? Nothing. They haven't done anything. There's a little bit of movement maybe in the one-house budgets, but even that, they don't really address this critical issue that's affecting New Yorkers. And I ask them, when? When is it going to be right? As Mark mentioned, inflation's at a 40-year high, 8%. He mentioned an average family, that's going to cost them $5,000 a year. Even Biden's Treasury Secretary said we're in for very uncomfortable high inflation throughout the year. So ultimately, I ask, when are they going to act? We have great proposals. They're not going to be a cure-all for everything, but at least it's going to provide relief for New Yorkers right now. So thank you, Mark, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. To speak of one of those proposals, Senators Akshar and Oberacher.
Peter, go ahead.
I know.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming out today. It's great to be here with County Executive Mark Molinaro and our Assembly Leader Barkley, and of course all my colleagues from the Senate and the Assembly. You know, the example that was just given was that there's a house fire and that this house is burning down. Well, I'm a volunteer firefighter, and I've got an answer for it. I've got the answer to the burning house. And all of us understand what, people are going through. Families, individuals businesses. They are struggling to make ends meet, and it's getting worse every day. We need to provide direct and immediate relief, and that is exactly what suspending this gas tax will do. Later today, we will be voting on the Senate One House budget resolution. It includes record spending of over $216 billion. There's room to suspend the gas tax and help every New Yorker. In fact, we have a $10 billion, with a B, we have a $10 billion budget surplus. And the state should not be profiting on the backs of consumers. And what amazes me is that I hear the governor question whether suspending the gas tax will actually help consumers because gas prices will continue to rise. And just let that sink in for a minute. It's misguided thinking. Anything that the government can do to help people keep more of their own hard-earned money is a plus. Additionally, we need to do a better job ensuring that the state's funds are actually used for their intended purposes. Only 17 cents out of every dollar, 17 cents out of every dollar from the state's gas tax is going to the road and bridge capital improvements. How many of you traveled to get here today? I dare say, condition that road was in when you arrived, and it's going to be even worse months and months later. And the 17 cents that needs to go there, will be used in the intended purposes. And we really need to follow up when we start looking at not only our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure, those areas of upstate New York that are sorely underdeveloped. Albany politicians have allowed these tax dollars to be diverted for years, and that's highway robbery. And that's how the government here in Albany gets a bad name. And it's time to right the wrong. Legislation I have introduced, along with my colleague Senator Akshar, not only suspends the gas tax, but also ensures that we start collecting that tax again. Our roads and bridges will receive the attention they deserve. Rising prices at the pump hurt our small businesses, our farmers, and further contribute to the record inflation. There are certain factors that are out of our control, but we can do something with the taxes. And the time is now to suspend the gas tax and provide real relief for the people who need it most. Again, I thank you for your attention to this, and I would now like to turn this over to my colleague, Senator Akshar.
A couple words, thank you.
Yep.
Marcus, thank you for being in Albany with us. Thank you so much for your leadership, not only in Dutchess, but across this great state. And I, too, join in the chorus of our colleagues in knowing that you are exactly what Americans need. You are the help that they so desperately need, and we thank you for all of your work. I just want to make a couple of points here. Today really is about affordability. Ensuring that we as government, we as members of the state legislature and others do our part in ensuring that New York is more affordable. That is the responsibility, frankly, of an elected official. But also, and something I learned from Marcus many years ago, was to ensure that as an elected member, you're a problem solver. And clearly there are many problems that we are faced with. And we are putting forth solutions to solve some of those problems. I want to make two very quick points. So it's been a week since Senator Oberacker and I have introduced this particular piece of legislation. For many months, Republicans in this state house have advanced policies around energy policy and making New York more affordable. What do our colleagues say? I heard this the other day, and I couldn't help but smile. You are robbing Peter to pay Paul. That was what they suggested. By suspending the gas tax, you are robbing Peter to pay Paul. My friends, here is the reality. New York State government has been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years. For years. And they're robbing the taxpayer. The money that they take year in year after year is being taken from the taxpayer, and they're certainly not seeing the benefits of that. The second point I would make, at a time when we are talking about suspending the gas tax to provide immediate relief, what are our friends doing? They're talking about implementing a carbon tax that would increase the price of gasoline by 55 cents a gallon. What sense does that make? It makes 0 sense to me, and I know it makes 0 sense to the people who are standing behind me. Now, there was some glimmer of hope in reading the one house, at least from the Senate, that they're talking about suspending the gas tax, but they're just talking about it. And that is in a budget bill, a budget that is not due for another couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks. New Yorkers need immediate relief now. That's why, in fact, we should take up this bill and suspend the gas tax by way of legislation and not wait for the budget. County Executive, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. You know, I want to echo the points that my colleagues have brought up here today, but I'm here to speak as someone who has the experience of being a single mom who lived paycheck to paycheck, and I'd have to tell you, I don't know where you would find the money to actually afford to be able to pay these bills. You know, my office is hearing from our neighbors whose energy bills have tripled. Can you imagine that? What do you say to a single parent who would have to choose between feeding their kids, paying that bill on time, and what about a senior who we all know lives on a fixed income? There is no extra money. How do they do it? Or a college student who's doing everything that they can to live independently, get education, and make ends meet. What do you say to him or her? Many of these out-of-control bills came without warning, and these are the people, the real people that they're hurting right now. New Yorkers need relief now. And you know, you've often heard me say Albany lives in a bubble, right? So way back in November, when I saw that the prices were rapidly increasing, I sent a letter to the governor on November 3rd, asking her to suspend the gas tax. No reply. In addition, on February 16th, I wrote to the governor and the PSC commissioner urging the state to suspend any state taxes and fees related to utility and energy costs, and urging the PSC to launch an investigation into those rising costs. While the PSC did respond that they have in fact launched an investigation, again, I've received no response from the governor. New Yorkers deserve an answer, but more importantly, they deserve real relief, and we aren't going to stop pushing until they get it. Thank you. And thank you, Marcus.
The House is indeed on fire, and we are here today to provide relief and emergency assistance. We call on our colleagues, the Democrats, both in this building and in Washington, D.C., to take action immediately. New Yorkers and Americans need it. And with that, we'll certainly take any questions.
The governor said on top of comments that you referenced that she's not sure if the money will go to the consumer. What promise do you think that you can make that money would get to them? Not looking at the systems, maybe the governor's not looking at that would kind of address that.
I could agree with you.
Yeah, I find that a kind of a strange type of retort to something like this. Obviously, you take taxes off, the product is going to be cheaper. It's a competitive market for gas. And I point to, I do the grocery shopping, believe it or not, in my family. And I go to Tops, which is our local grocery store, and I get when you check out, they give you a discount on gas if you buy from Tops. Unfortunately, in Pulaski, we don't have a Tops gas station. But you know where I go to save 10 cents a gallon? I drive up the road to the next town. So obviously, consumers are driven. Some say, what, 8 cents off a gallon, what difference does that make? Well, I tell you, it makes a difference to me because I drive to the next town in order to get it. So the idea of taking off the tax, I don't understand how that's going to line the corporation's pockets, frankly. I think it's going to lower the price because it's a competitive market.
I know Senator Tedisco wanted to answer. Let me also just say, and I'll at least echo a comment This government seems terribly concerned about corporations gouging. This is the same government that, by the way, had for 2 years emergency authority keeping us from doing 1,000 things. Perhaps they might lean in on corporations and others to be sure that they don't gouge. As importantly, consumers make choices, and with those choices, businesses have to respond. But the biggest price gouger perhaps even in America, is government. And perhaps we put a check on that. I know the senator wanted to add.
I think the primary thing we don't want to have go unnoticed is that when we put forth these policies to help the beleaguered property taxpayer, our constituents, every single time they're stopped, it's not because Republicans have put forth great ideas and want to leave more money in our constituents' pockets. It's because the majorities who have full control say it's a bad idea. It won't bring in more revenue, so we can have more taxing and more spending. That's why we have a spending cap in New York State, because it's out of control. Make no mistake about this. The reason why we're flush with money right now, and Governor Hochul can travel all around the state and hand out money hand over fist, is because the federal government, during this pandemic, has helped bail us out. If there's anything good about a pandemic that's killed thousands of individuals, if you could say it's good, is we're bringing revenue in at a point where we were almost bankrupt. Now remember this, next year, the year after that, that federal money is not going to be coming in, especially to the fact that you saw some gerrymandering now, which illustrates that possibly we could be down to 4 Republican Senate seats in this state. And we're one of 7 states that lost another representative. So we're losing the power to stand up, to speak up, because 319,000 people left the state of New York last year. Now, why do you think when you do the surveys and you ask them about that, number one issue, taxes. Public safety is up there. Why is this the right tax in the home heating, oil, and the energy cost, the right thing to diminish right now? Well, for upstate New York, it's discretionary, geographically discriminatory. Because think about it. We don't have subways. We don't have mass transit. We don't have public transit to the extent that they have it there. We got to bring our kids to school on occasions. We got to bring them to get their health care. We have to go to our jobs, middle income and lower income. Discriminatory in 2 ways, geographic discriminatory and discriminatory in terms of wealth. Okay, we have to have vehicles. We have to have cars. We have to buy that gas. Today when I came in and I stopped, $5 for a gallon of gasoline. So it's not only a discriminatory tax for the whole state, actually, but exceptionally discriminatory for upstate New York and those of middle or lower income wealth who are just trying to make ends meet. Now think about it. As we, for every dollar with this inflation, eat up the money for gasoline taxes, for tuition, for groceries. This goes beyond just the energy we're talking about. We have young people who have purchased houses. They pay a mortgage, then they pay their taxes. We have seniors who are on fixed income and on small pensions. They have to pay those taxes now. They're being challenged to keep their homes in New York State right now, ancillary to all those taxes on the outside they're paying. When it comes to pay their mortgage to keep their house or their taxes, school and municipal taxes, they don't know if they can make it right now. That's what they tell me when I go to the doors right now. So this combination of energy will take the burden off of them so they can keep their homes, actually, so they can drive to work with their kids, to school and to the doctor. So it has tentacles. It affects other areas. The most important thing, if you say, what's the most valuable thing you have? It's not their car. It's not their snow blower, because we got a lot of snow here. It's their home. Everybody wants to live and keep their home. As you eat away their dollars in these other taxable areas, which are discriminatory to upstate New York, they're challenged for the one thing they value the most, their home. So it expands out all into those other areas, and I thank my colleagues. I'm proud to be a sponsor of their bill, and I'm proud to support somebody I served in the New York State Assembly with for many years, a child prodigy, So now you've grown up and you're old enough to be a congressperson, and you should be right now.
I've not grown up.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Other questions?
Executive, what is your response to the New York Times article criticizing the relief funds being used for the baseball stadium?
In Dutchess County, a little off topic, but the county is proud to have invested in our county park. It is a Dutchess County park. And in avoiding the borrowing that we would have had to engage in, Dutchess County taxpayers are able to see relief from the interest on debt, but also turn what is a one-time revenue, and I'd like to get back to that thought in just one moment, a one-time revenue from the federal government into a 25-year profit that we're using to subsidize expansion of mental health and substance use disorder programming. I find it convenient that some would be critical of the investment in Dutchess, but as you probably know, the federal government in providing ARP dollars included broad use for government purposes, and quite frankly, the Congress and the Treasury have expanded that because they can't get other states and other parts of the country to spend their dollars. But in the case of one-time revenue, I would offer, sorry to do this to you all, but Dutchess is slated to secure approximately $58 million. We didn't ask for all that money. In fact, as I often say, when I use the analogy, the house was on fire. We asked for some water, and Congress sent 5 fire trucks, 4 ambulances, a hospital, and a helicopter. I didn't ask for any of it. But what we try to do with one-time revenue, something that Albany and Washington can learn a little bit about, is instead of using one-time revenue for multiple-year expenditures, we use one-time revenue to create multiple-year revenue. And so what that does for us is instead of infusing all this money in for a one-time revenue for multiple-year expenses, creating budget deficits in the out years, we took a third of that, used it to generate new revenue, investment in a Dutchess County-owned park with a beautiful, if you've been there, 5,000 people every night, residents enjoying themselves and investing. It's about a $10 million economic opportunity in Dutchess. And then the balance of those dollars we use in other programming like homelessness, expansion of broadband access, and investment in emergency response. So I think that kind of approach is why Dutchess County has the highest bond rating in the state of New York, and I'd put my finances up against Washington's any day. Other questions?
Can I just ask, I'm sorry on the missed it. Is there anything the PSC could do right now to lower energy costs?
Do you want to address that? Well, here's the thing. There's two things, and I'd offer from a regulatory perspective. Number one, the PSC initiating a formal investigation and the governor leaning in. By the way, as previous governors have from time to time, does many times force the industry itself to take corrective action. It may just be in the case of Central Hudson in our community, but others addressing some of the billing practices that frankly weren't necessarily predatory, but they created this massive increase in cost to residents and they can't support it. So that PSC action, that's the point of the Public Service Commission. If it's not there to monitor and implement, no wonder why they say the corporations will price gouge. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess if the regulatory entities are sitting on the sidelines, they might. But in the case of that action alone, we think the PSC could at least facilitate relief as it relates to the billing practices. Again, they weren't predatory, but their implementation of a new billing system created this massive hike in estimated bills. The other I want to offer to you, and the senator didn't mention it, but several years ago, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, made a zone change. This is very boring stuff, but in the Mid-Hudson Valley, what that meant was those of us, families, farmers, small businesses in the Mid-Hudson Valley, went from one rate of paying electric costs to a much higher rate of electric costs in the out years this year. Why? Because Albany and Washington politicians, both Democrat majorities, said that if we all pay more money in the Hudson Valley, if we pay a higher rate, base rate, that there would be an increase in supply. And when that supply increases, the costs will drive down. Guess what happened? All of the Hudson Valley, all of Long Island started to pay massively higher electric rates because of that FERC change. Washington can undo that today. Congressman Delgado can call for that today. They don't, maybe because they don't understand it or they don't care about it. But at the end of the day, Washington can reverse that, at least temporarily. It would drive down the base rate because God knows we're not creating more supply. I mean, whether it's Washington or Albany, they're not creating more supply. So all we have is this arbitrary increase in cost with no benefit to consumers and users. Other questions? Seeing none, it's great to be back. Have a great day.